Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Solver Madness, session 3. Okay, Andrew, take it away.
Yeah, welcome back. Thanks for joining us. We're going to wrap things up by getting into lighting. First, we'll pick up where we left off in the last session and do meshing and setting up lighting shaders, some of that's fun stuff. And then we'll move on to applying the stuff that we've learned to building a setup that's slightly different, similar principles, where we'll use the template head that's included with Houdini and sort of shape it with some VDB advection flip, and it's going to be fun. So without further ado, share my screen. All right. Is that visible for everyone? How's that look? Yeah.
Yep.
Perfect.
Perfect. All right. Well, let's dive in. So we left off with building our color preview. So we're bringing all of our simulation outputs into this network right here. And any simulations that are not currently colored, we're adding a color to them just so we can easily preview things. So if I just make a flip book real quick here. And this is all before the meshing. We want to be able to quickly preview things and get a feel for, that's not what I want. Bear with me. $1920 by 1080. And then as part of this same network, we're branching this out to cache everything combined together. And we're only going to keep the CD attribute and the velocity. And that's so that when we get into the next step, when we're meshing everything, we're not going to be running any simulations because we want to sort of traverse our timeline without triggering any simulations. So you can think of this as the combined cache as sort of a pre-cache so that we can have quicker feedback when we're doing all of our meshing. So yeah, so here's our color-coded preview. I think we went over this a little bit in the last session, but it's fairly quick to generate, and this is what you'd be previewing as you make any changes to the simulation setups. And no need to make that full flip book. I've pre-cached everything else. Those of you who want to run the cache, just to review this real quick, you'll need to go to your aliases and variables and make sure that this variable called cache is pointing to a place on your drive that makes sense. And then you can go to the PDG setup right here. It should just be about cooking this last node. So you go right click, cook node. And now it will be slow. You give it 20, 30 minutes based on your system, your particular computer. But if you want to do that, you're welcome to. So we have our cached, all of our cached data here. And we're going to keep the colors too, because one of the things I'd like to do when we're meshing everything is transfer color over again, just to double check that I'm not losing anything. Sometimes when you're going through a lot of different VDB from Polygon or VDB from particles and adjusting things, you can lose some of your mesh data. And this is one way I can check that by just transferring the color back and comparing it to the original preview. So I'm gonna actually just wire that directly in. So our combined cache is coming in, and the first thing we're going to do is split them into two groups, a point group and a mesh group. And up here, I've grouped everything. So anything that is a mesh, for instance, the glass, our martini glass, is prefixed with mesh. Same for the flip mesh, and any points any of the particles are prefixed with PNT and they're grouping. So then it's an easy matter of just saying anything that has PNT as a prefix, split that in two. So we have groups for points and groups for the mesh. And these points are then split again. And the reason for that is I want to set a threshold. I don't want to mesh all the particles. That wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. And what we want to do is just split them based on a p-scale threshold, take the bigger ones and mesh those. So we're doing a VDB from particles for any of the particles that are above a scale of 0.025. And the rest are just piped into a little bit of cleanup over here, getting rid of groups and caching out as points, and we'll render those as point primitives. So the only attributes they're going to have are velocity, and that's really all. Velocity and p-scale is all they need to render. I'm also making an attribute called matte blend, which we'll cover later as well, and setting that to 0. So in this other pipe, let's go over to the mesh here, doing a VDB from polygons. And you can see there's some faceting. There's ways to deal with that with smoothing, and also when you do the final convert VDB into polygons, there's some techniques for smoothing that out as well. So that all gets turned into a VDB, all the mesh input together, and then combining that with the points that we used VDB from particles for. Doing a little bit of reshaping on them, just doing a little bit of erode to shrink them, you can see, just a little bit. Then those are combining together. VDB smooth them to get rid of some of that faceting. And then we'll convert them back into polygons with a little bit of adaptivity so they're not too dense. And one thing we're doing is an ISO value. I find using an ISO value that's not 0 helps to get rid of some of that polygon faceting as well. In fact, while we're here, we might as well just sort of review what a VDB surface is. I've added a visualizer here that is it's a volume slice. So we're looking at a cross section of our VDB volume. So if let's see if I can draw here on the screen. So what I'm mapping this visualization range based on the interior and exterior bands of the VDB surface. What that means is, if you look here in the VDB from polygons, you have exterior band voxels and interior band voxels. And actually, let's go ahead and add a tree, a visualized tree. So if you can see, those are the voxels. This gives you a view of the voxels that are defining the surface, overlaid with the polygons that are coming in. So what this means is, see if I can get my pencil here. Okay. So the way a VDE volume is defining the surface is by a field of values. So positive values above, outside of our surface. So, and negative values inside. So -0 inside and +0 outside. So 0 is going to be the boundary of our polygons, and we're going to have increasing values going outward and negative values going inward. And that's what where the band comes in. So we have exterior band voxels of 3, and this is multiplied by your voxel size. That's why if I'm remapping it here.
A vampire is a mythical creature that subsists.
I'm sorry, one second. Siri is.
Want to hear more?
One second. Siri decided that I was talking to her and started piping up. I'm not sure if you heard that.
No worries.
Yeah.
Andrew, while we have this pause, may I ask a question?
Absolutely, yeah.
From Christopher, was there
Mhm.
a reason other than artistic for picking the particle size for meshing and excluding?
For splitting them by particle threshold.
I believe so.
Yeah. Well, we don't want to mesh particles that are very, very small. They can just render as point primitives.
Mhm.
We're not gaining anything by meshing
Got
them.
it.
Yeah,
Got it.
that's the
Great.
main thing. All right. So, oh yes. So back to where we were with. So I'm mapping this visualizer. This you can see minus 0.03 and plus 0.03 because that's the interior and exterior band of the voxels multiplied by the voxel size. So if you look at in our visualized tree right here, it's basically how much data are we going to have outside of that surface boundary if we double the exterior band. Give it a moment here. You'll see it extends out further. And VDBs are sparse, so there's only data surrounding our polygons. So does that all make sense? So what that means is you can set an ISO value that's higher than 0. What that ends up doing is it expands out the mesh a little bit. I'm going to turn this off. So very small values, but if I go to 0 here, it's going to be closer to the original surface. But as you extend this out, you'll see it'll start expanding. And that generally helps a little bit with smoothing out the faceting that you might get. So then we're combining that with the meshed points and smoothing that again. And then now we kind of get some nice blobby surfaces, which is what we want. So once that's converted into a mesh again, polygons, we are transferring velocity and color. So now we have velocity that we can reference for motion blur when we're rendering this later on. And the color is just really there to check things because I want to make sure I'm not losing any data. I can compare it back against the preview and make sure that with smoothing out something in the VDB, I haven't lost too much. Then we're doing another attribute transfer. And at this point, what we're doing is we're taking our original martini glass mesh and assigning it a value of 1, assigning a value of 1 to our matte blend and transferring that. And as you remember up here, we also have it, we're assigning 0 to all the particles. And this is going to be for rendering purposes later on. It's going to, there's a couple things we can do with it. So if I visualize that here, so we have a value of 1 for the martini glass and a value of 0 for the matte blend for everything else. And then that's also being blurred. We're blurring that so we don't have a hard edge. Actually, if I turn this off, you'll see what I mean. So this gives us a little bit of transition between that. And that's going to be handy for when we start to shade everything. So that all gets cached separately. We've got a cache for the mesh and a separate cache for points. So any questions so far? Okay. Well, next I'm referencing those into just object merging those into these geo nodes here. It's just handy sometimes to, rather than referencing directly into the simulation setup, just put them into these containers just for organizational purposes. So we got our mesh and our points, and also a background cyc, which is important if we're doing transmission. Anytime we're doing refraction, it's nice to have something behind it that we can refract. And this is really just a curve that is extruded, poly extruded, and then match size just to get it sitting on the Y plane. And that's it. In the mesh, I'm actually calculating speed. This is post cache too, and this is going to be handy. Calculating, I'm getting the magnitude of the velocity, which gives us a float value for how fast everything is moving. So using the length function here for the velocity, and then fitting that, finding what that maximum speed was, and then fitting that into a 0 to 1, because we're going to use that in the render too. And then in the points here, I've got an additional p-scale, like a master p-scale adjustment. So you can, this is handy because sometimes when you're rendering, you want to see, well, maybe I want all my particles to be a little bit smaller. It's kind of like a global, it's a global scale for everything. And then if you find it's working at a smaller scale, you can go back and maybe make some changes to your simulations, run it again at a different size. I've found for effects like this, a lot of it is just finding the sweet spot for what those particle sizes should be. And then also calculating speed here, which we'll use in the render. So I already have a render set up on a LopNet, but we'll go ahead and build one just for fun. Network. And dive inside. We go to a Solaris view. Here we go. All right, so we'll SOP import. Go here. I always prefix stuff that I'm rendering with renders, just makes it simpler. So get our cyc, name it, and then grab both the mesh and the particles. We'll call it points. And merge those together. And also scene import our camera. Get our view. And then let's also add an environment light. And just to keep this simple, I actually just used an HDR that comes with, you know, the Houdini libraries. So we'll just go to HDR and grab the Skylight Garage. Didn't really do anything with it, just gave it an exposure of 1. And then a render settings, camera render settings. And we want to make sure we're getting our camera. And render with XPU. So take a quick render and see things, make sure it's all working. So yeah, it's all coming in. It's actually kind of fun when it's just gray shaded like this. It looks very sculptural. So we'll need some materials. So add a material library. And I'm just going to go and grab some materials I already have. So let's copy. Sorry, I'm having some mouse issues. Seems to have been confused. Let's see. There we go. All right. So I was copied and pasted some material X. Give me a moment here. My mouse is acting up. Okay. So I'm going to autofill those materials, and we'll go ahead and drag our cyc into the material I've already built for that. And to start with, let's just take our mesh and our points and put it into this, assign this shader mix to it. And we'll dive inside. So as you recall, we created an attribute called matte blend. And this is very handy for a lot of different reasons. But as you can see here, I've got two shaders, two materials, one that's red and one that's blue. And we can pipe both those materials into a material mix and use that matte blend to mix between them. So that's handy if you want to have a totally different material for the martini glass and for the water. And the way to do that is you use this geometry property value. We'll grab any attribute that you're exporting from onto your geometry. It's very handy. So if we wanted to be very specific about things and split hairs, really the martini glass it's glass. It's going to have a higher index of refraction than water. So I have two materials set up here. And the glass has a index of refraction of 1.52 and water is 1.33. So if we really wanted to be technical, we'd map that into the glass input and have a separate shader for the water. I don't think you're going to see much of a difference. But this is one way to do it. Obviously, if all you're doing is changing the IRR between your object and your bubbles and water, this may not be the most efficient way to go about it. But if you're doing completely different shaders, if you wanted to have a completely different set of material values for one or the other, so you wanted the glass, a tinted glass, for instance. Let's do it this way. And then you could do that very simply by just blending between two shaders. And now, while we're here, you'll notice something that's going on is that we're getting a lot of these black splotches. And the reason for that, this is kind of important, is because in our render settings here, we haven't done anything with our refraction limits. In this case, we have so much geometry that's kind of piling up in these areas that the rays are not getting going all the way through. We have to set a higher refraction value so that it can iterate through and recurse. It recurses through all that geometry. So we want to set it high enough to take all those different layers of geometry into account, but not so high that we're slowing down our render. I think I was using a value of around 32, but I think if we go towards the end of our timeline here, yeah, you just want to be judicious about your refraction limit because it does add a lot to the render time. And while we're here, we might as well add a few AOVs that we could use for denoising. So albedo and the normal, and we'll turn on the NVIDIA denoiser, which will use the albedo and normal to drastically speed things up. And that doesn't mean the path trace samples will still be important, but this will give us some clean renders in a fraction of the time. Any questions so far?